Hello, I'm Jerry Spinelli, Production Horticulture Advisor with the University of California Cooperative Extension in San Diego. Today we are in the greenhouse at the South Coast Research and Extension Center in Irvine, and we are going to measure the volumetric water content. What is the volumetric water content and why should we care? Well, if I have this lantana, I can define the quantity of water that is contained inside this substrate, the volume of water in milliliter or in fluid ounces, divided by the volume of the container. So how much water you think is in there by volume? 30%, 20%, 10%? This number is kind of an interesting number to measure because we base on that many considerations for irrigation management. So how do you measure it? Well, I guess you could squish all the water out of the substrate. You squish it and then you collect it in a graduated cylinder and then you measure it. But you understand that it's kind of difficult because then it's almost impossible to squish it physically, mechanically squish that water out. So instead, we use a trick. We use a trick that is based on the fact that water density is a constant and it's 1 gram per milliliter. And so we have these two containers here, one with wet substrate, and it turns out that this is as wet as it can be because it's at container capacity or water holding capacity, and this is completely dry. So by the difference in weight we can find out what's the weight of water contained in this container, and then we can use a trick to convert that weight into milliliters. And again, 1 gram of water, 1 milliliter of volume of water weighs 1 gram, or the other way around, 1 gram of water takes the space of 1 milliliter of volume. And so we can just measure the difference. And here, I hope you can see from the scale, but I promise that the number is 1364, and I have it right here, of the wet container, and the weight, I got 2 grams of water in there, and the weight of the dry container is 396. And so by the difference in weight, I can calculate that the weight of the water is 960 grams. The surprise is the same as 968 milliliters. So now we figured out the volume of water that is contained inside that substrate, and we didn't even have to squish it. And now, how would I calculate the volume of this container? So we can use the same trick. And instead of measuring the volume, we're going to measure the weight. And so I put a plastic bag in this container. We could have also plugged the holes with some silicone glue, and it turns out that the weight of the pot with the plastic bag filled with water to the fill line, the same fill line that later we'll use for substrate, is 196 grams. That again, if it was only water, it corresponds to 196 milliliters, and the empty pot with the bag is 26 grams. And so we can take the difference and we will calculate what's the weight of only that water, but we also know that the weight is the same as the volume. So now by measuring the volume of the water, we know the volume of the container. And so now we have everything. Now we have everything to calculate the volumetric water content. We know the volume of the water in the substrate, and we know the volume of the container. And so here it is. Volume of water is 968. We got it from up there. And the volume of the container is 1970. We got it right there. And so the volumetric water content of this pot is 50%, which is a lot. if you think about it, is a lot. And this pot happens to be just irrigated. We irrigated, we saturated it 2 hours ago, and we let it drain. And this is a condition that we call container capacity, which is the highest that you can ever have. And so now we just figured out that this particular pit perlite mix has an effective container capacity of 49%, and now we can use this number to manage our irrigation. And from the South Coast Research and Extension Center in Irvine, Jerry Spinelli with the University of California Cooperative Extension. I'll see you in the next video.
And if you learned something through this video, please scan this code and give us some feedback.